Claire hadn't stepped foot in her childhood town for almost 3 years as the train doors slid open and the sharp Vermont air kissed her cheeks. She wondered if her return was already a mistake. The platform felt smaller than she remembered, but the chill in the wind was familiar, crisp, a little biting, carrying scents of pine and wood smoke. A man in a navy coat and thick scarf tipped his hat as he stepped down behind her. The train rumbled on. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and looked toward the cab stand where a single car idled under a lamplight. The driver, a woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her ponytail, offered a smile. "You look like someone coming home for the holidays," she said, lifting Claire's duffel with practiced ease. Claire returned a faint smile. Something like that. As the car pulled away, she watched the sleepy town pass outside the window. Brattleboro hadn't changed much. Some storefronts had new signs, but the church steeple still cut into the sky just the same, and the bridge over the West River still groaned slightly when crossed. Snow flurries danced across the windshield, catching the early evening light. The holiday season had arrived without asking if anyone was ready for it. The Whitmore house came into view. A white colonial with a sagging porch that wore its years honestly, the garlands of pine cones and twine wrapped around the banisters, and a faded Give Thanks banner fluttered above the doorway. Claire's stomach knotted. The front door opened before the cab rolled to a stop. Eleanor stood there in her knit cardigan arms, tucked in front, like she'd been waiting, unsure whether to step forward or not. "Claire," her mother breathed, not quite smiling. "Look at you." Claire stepped out into the cold. "Hi, Mom." There was a brief hug, warm but fragile, and then Thomas appeared, stepping carefully onto the porch with his Brattleboro Reformer mug in hand. "Well, there's our girl," he said. "We didn't think you'd beat the snow." "I tried to catch the earlier train," Claire replied, glancing up at the gray sky. "Looks like I made it just in time." They helped her with her bags, though she insisted on carrying the duffel herself. Inside the house smelled of cinnamon cloves and old radiators. The furniture hadn't changed: the same plaid couch, the same bookshelf with the sag in the middle. On the mantel above the fireplace, the family photos stood in their usual order, untouched by time. A faint hum drifted from the kitchen, her mother's voice barely audible, picking up the tune of Autumn Leaves. Claire shed her coat and turned toward the kitchen, only to be stopped by another voice. "Claire," Vanessa said. She stood at the base of the stairs, perfectly composed in a navy turtleneck and tailored slacks. Her hair was pinned back neatly. "You made it. Good to see you, too," Claire said, and meant it, though the warmth in her voice cooled by instinct. Vanessa walked into the kitchen without offering a hug. Claire followed after her parents. The kitchen had changed, new countertops, brighter lights, but the quiet rhythm hadn't. Her mother set down napkins with deliberate folds. Thomas stirred his coffee without sipping it. Dinner came quickly with the turkey already roasting in the oven, and side dishes reheating on the stove. Eleanor brought out a loaf of pumpkin bread June Abrahams had dropped off earlier that day, wrapped in wax paper with a gingham ribbon. Claire recognized the handwriting on the note, still tucked under the ribbon. "Happy Thanksgiving." J. Vanessa served the wine and took her seat as if she'd always been the one hosting. Her tone throughout the meal was practiced, drawing their parents in with stories about her work, how the neighbors had finally removed that broken fence, and how nice the couple from New Hampshire was. You know, Whitaker something from across the state line. They stopped by the other day just to talk about possibilities. "Nothing's decided," she added, barely glancing Claire's way. "Just conversation over coffee." Claire picked at her roasted carrots and forced herself not to react. The name Whitaker sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. After the pie was served pecan with a scoop of vanilla from the market on Main Street, Vanessa turned the conversation gently toward Claire. "So," she said, eyes fixed, but pleasant, still working on the non-profit plans. Claire folded her napkin slowly, still developing. "Quiet phase." Vanessa smiled, but the corners of her eyes stayed still. "Sounds like it's been a long, quiet phase." Thomas cleared his throat. "You know, not everything needs to move fast. Some things take time to get right." Claire offered him a grateful look. Vanessa shrugged lightly and moved on to talk about her next real estate seminar. Eleanor silently passed Claire the last slice of pie, and for the first time since arriving, she felt like someone was listening. Later, as they cleaned up, Claire moved carefully through the hall with an armful of dishes. On the console table near the stairs sat a folder labeled Whitaker Properties. Its edge poked out from beneath a pile of circulars and a church bulletin. Her fingers hesitated. She looked toward the kitchen. Eleanor was humming again. Claire set down the dishes beside the sink and returned to the hallway. As she helped her mother clear dishes, Claire quietly slipped the real estate folder into her tote bag. Thanksgiving was 2 days away, and the smell of baked apples should have warmed Claire's heart, but the silence over breakfast was colder than the frost on the windows. The kitchen had always been the warmest room in the Whitmore house. This morning, though, even the sunshine that streamed across the checkered linoleum felt pale, like it wasn't quite sure it was welcome. Thomas sat at the table, his coffee cooling beside the folded pages of the Brattleboro Reformer. He adjusted his glasses, squinting at a piece on the town's plan to expand the historic district. Eleanor hummed quietly while folding dish towels at the counter. Her embroidered apron, the one with faded sunflowers tied loosely around her waist. Claire sipped her tea and let the steam rise to meet her face. The scent of maple syrup and bacon lingered in the air, cozy but deceiving. The eggs on her plate had gone cold while she debated whether to speak. The folder from last night was tucked under her bed, its presence as heavy as the quiet tension in the room. She set down her mug and looked up. "So, about the Whitaker Properties folder I saw yesterday." Vanessa, already dressed for the day in a crisp cardigan and slacks, didn't miss a beat. "Oh, that." She smiled lightly, cutting into her toast with surgical precision. "It's nothing firm, just conversations. We all agreed selling is best." Claire's fork paused just above her plate.
"We all."
Thomas lowered his newspaper an inch, blinking as if someone had nudged him awake. "Well," Vanessa continued,
"It's a big house, a lot to maintain, and the couple from New Hampshire made a compelling offer. They want to turn it into a bed and breakfast. Very tasteful, very low impact." Eleanor didn't speak. Her hands kept folding the same towel. Slower now. Claire tried to keep her tone even. "When was this discussed last month?" Vanessa said. "We brought it up while you were busy with—" "What was it?" "Your non-profit planning." Thomas cleared his throat. "Vanessa's been handling the details. She's here all year, after all." Claire looked at her father, then back at Vanessa. "You didn't think to call. Ask for input." Vanessa offered a small shrug, the kind meant to seem harmless. "We figured you'd want what's best. Less stress. You've got your own life now." Claire nodded, slowly, absorbing the words as they hit. Across the table, Thomas rattled coins into a mason jar, an old habit from his diner days, where tips went straight into quarters for weekend movie nights. The clink of metal filled the silence that followed. A soft knock broke the moment doors open. Eleanor called, gently setting down the towel. June Abraham stepped in, bundled in a wool coat, the color of rust, cheeks pink from the cold. She held a round tin wrapped in twine.
I brought muffins, she said, cheerfully. Pumpkin, with just a hint of nutmeg. Still warm if you're quick. Her eyes found Claire, and her smile widened. Look at you back on the mountain. Thought the wind might have blown you off the train. Claire rose to greet her, genuinely smiling for the first time that day. It almost did. June passed her the tin and, with a wink, pressed something small into Claire's palm. It was a tarnished key, old with a worn wooden tag attached.
Figured it's time you held on to this again, she said in a voice only Claire could hear. Claire's brow furrowed. The attic. June just smiled and patted her shoulder. Some doors only open for those who remember what they hold. Vanessa's eyes narrowed from across the kitchen. Always full of riddles. June, only when they're needed? The older woman replied with surprising firmness. June didn't stay long, just enough time for a brief chat about the frost line creeping up her porch steps, and how the mail had been delayed again. Used to be. It came on horseback, she mused as she gathered her coat. These days it gets lost with the click of a button. When she left, silence settled again. Claire excused herself under the pretense of needing to call someone. Upstairs in the quiet of her childhood room, she sat on the edge of the bed and reached beneath it. The Whitaker folder was still there, right where she had stashed it the night before. She opened it carefully. The papers inside were crisp, neatly typed, and thorough. Purchase agreement, escrow terms, a projected closing date, Saturday. Her name appeared nowhere, not as an heir, not as a party to be notified, not as anything. Claire sat back, the folder open across her lap, and listened to the ticking of the radiator near the window. Outside, a crow landed on the snow-dusted railing, fluffed its feathers, and stared in her direction, as if waiting for her to move. She whispered aloud, "This was never meant to include me." In the attic, the dust smelled of cedar and memory. Claire hadn't planned to find anything, but the past had been waiting for her. The old floorboards creaked beneath her as she pushed open the narrow door at the end of the upstairs hallway. Cold air, tinged with mothballs, and something older paper maybe, or wool, rose to meet her. Sunlight slanted through a small round window near the peak of the roof, casting golden bars across trunks and boxes, as though the room had been gently wrapped in time. Claire stood for a moment at the threshold, key in her hand, heart in her throat. June's voice lingered in her mind. That house remembers even when people don't. Her fingers tightened around the old tag tied to the key. She had almost forgotten the cedar chest. Tucked behind an armchair with a broken leg, it was nearly swallowed by the attic's shadowed corner. She stepped over a discarded quilt frame and knelt in front of it, brushing aside the thin layer of dust covering the lid. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease. A soft click. The lid creaked open. Inside, the cedar's scent bloomed rich and slightly sweet, stronger than memory. Resting atop a folded wool shawl was a small velvet box and an envelope yellowed with time but sealed with care. Beneath them, wrapped in parchment, was a worn legal folder. Claire opened the envelope first. Her grandmother's handwriting, familiar and looped, filled the page. Dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then the time has come. This house may never belong to you in name, but its spirit has always been yours to protect. I saw the way you listened, the way you paid attention when others didn't. I saw your heart, even when others only saw your quiet. Let this letter remind you that silence is not weakness, and kindness is not naivete. With love, always. Nora. Her eyes blurred as she traced the loops in Nora's name. She pressed the page to her chest.
letting its warmth settle over the chill inside her. The velvet box held a simple silver ring etched with the faint lines of the family crest, a maple leaf nestled between two branches. She remembered seeing it once years ago on Nora's hand during Sunday dinners when the pies steamed on the sideboard and the radio played faintly in the background. The folder, however, brought her back to the present. It contained a notarized addendum to the family trust naming Claire as trustee in the event of any sale or transfer of the Whitmore property. The language was clear, the signatures real. The date was almost 7 years ago. She sat back slowly on her heels, the attic beams above her, crossing the ceiling like a cathedral's ribs. The light shifted, angling across her lap, as though pointing to what had been hidden. Claire didn't feel victorious. She felt seen. An hour later, she stood on June's porch ring, still tucked in her coat pocket. The older woman answered with a look that said she'd been expecting her. "Come in, June," said, stepping aside. "Tea's warm." Inside the fireplace, crackled in the living room. Peppermint filled the air, along with something buttery from the oven. Claire sat on the worn, floral couch, while June poured from a chipped teapot into mismatched china cups. "I found the letter," Claire said, her voice barely above the fire's snap, and the documents June handed her a saucer. "Good." Claire studied her. "You knew." "I would." June settled into her chair, tucking a knitted blanket over her knees. "I hoped you would. But I knew if anyone remembered where Nora kept her truths, it'd be you." Claire turned the cup in her hands. "Why didn't she just tell everyone?" "She tried," June said. "But people don't always hear the quiet ones." Nora knew Vanessa would fight for what she thought she deserved. She needed someone who wouldn't shout, just stand still. Claire looked up. "She gave you a copy." June nodded. In case Vanessa got pushy. She always was good at making her voice the only one in the room. A silence passed, softer than the ones earlier that day. June leaned forward, her gaze sharper now. "You remember a few years back when I had that Medicare mess? You spent hours on the phone with that call center figuring out the appeal. Didn't even know me well. Your sister said it wasn't her job. But you stayed." Claire looked down, surprised at the memory. "It wasn't a big deal." "To you," June said. "That's the day I knew you had Nora's heart." Claire's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. "You're not loud," June continued. "But people listen when they're ready." "Maybe it's time they heard you." Back at the house. Claire stood by the kitchen window as afternoon faded. The backyard lay quiet, the trees bare, the grass silvered by frost. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She picked up the phone and dialed, listening as the line connected to the automated recording. "Yes, I'd like to submit a formal freeze on transfer of title under trust number 3127NW. The crackling fire in the living room couldn't warm the chill that passed through the house once Claire spoke the words. "I've frozen the deal." She hadn't planned to say it like that. But there it was. Quiet, deliberate, floating just above the clink of forks and the murmur of post-dinner fatigue. The dishes had been cleared, save for the crumbs of cornbread and the half-empty pecan pie on the sideboard. The house smelled of turkey and cinnamon, but the tension in the room dulled even those familiar comforts. Thomas shifted in his armchair. The worn fabric groaned beneath him. Eleanor paused, holding a dish towel in her hands, her gaze frozen somewhere between Claire and the fireplace. Vanessa, seated near the hearth, with a glass of wine in hand, blinked once, then slowly set her glass down on the mantel. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said, her tone sharp with disbelief. "You... what?" Claire remained standing near the archway, that separated the dining room from the den. The fire snapped behind her, casting flickering shadows. Up the walls, shadows that danced like secrets, finally let loose. "I've submitted a freeze on the title transfer," Claire said, "under Grandma Nora's trust. It's valid. It's already in motion." The silence that followed was not confusion. It was restraint. Vanessa's lips pressed into a line so tight it whitened the skin around her mouth. "You've got to be kidding," she said, rising. "You waited until after pie to announce this. I didn't want a fight at the table." "Oh well, bravo," Vanessa said. "You've certainly avoided that." Thomas stirred his coffee 3 times in his chipped Vermont diner mug, his spoon clinking against ceramic with a steady, anxious rhythm. He didn't sip. Vanessa turned to him. "Dad, you're not actually going to let this stand, are you?" Claire opened her folder slowly and pulled out the papers.
The trust. Nora's letter. The photocopy June had signed. She stepped forward and placed them on the coffee table, folding each one open with care, like laying out offerings.
"Nora left this for me," Claire said. She gave a second copy to June. "You all can read it yourselves." Vanessa crossed her arms. "This is absurd. That letter. What it suddenly appears just when you decide to play hero. She gave me the key years ago," Claire said. Still calm, "I just didn't know what it opened until now." Eleanor picked up the letter, her fingers trembling slightly. Her eyes scanned the page, her mouth moving with each line. Thomas looked down at the paper, but didn't read. He stared instead at the ring on Claire's finger, the one he hadn't noticed before. "I don't believe this," Vanessa said, pacing now.
"You blindside us. You override months of work. You humiliate me."
Claire didn't flinch.
"I'm not destroying anything. I'm protecting what was meant to be. You think you're some savior."
Vanessa spat.
"This house isn't a shrine. It's a burden. And you've done nothing. Nothing to help carry it."
Claire looked at her sister, then really looked, and for the first time saw not just anger, but weariness. Vanessa's hands, usually steady, were clenched tight. Her voice shook. There was a sadness there, buried beneath pride.
"I never wanted to fight you," Claire said. "I just wanted to be included."
A shrill ring broke the moment Claire stepped away to answer her phone, the screen lighting up with the name of her lawyer. She turned slightly, spoke low and firm. "Yes, I understand. Thank you for confirming. Yes, I'll relay it." She ended the call and turned back toward the room. "It's official," she said. "The freeze is active. The sale can't proceed until everything is reviewed." Vanessa stared at her face, flushed, then grabbed her coat from the back of the chair.
"This is betrayal,"
she said, voice low.
"They'll turn on you too. Wait and see."
The door slammed hard enough to rattle the glass in the cabinet. No one moved for several seconds. The fire crackled. The wind tapped at the window, soft and steady. Claire sat down across from her parents, folding Nora's letter again with care, smoothing the edges, aligning the creases like a ritual. Eleanor blinked back whatever emotion welled in her eyes. Thomas's spoon hovered over his coffee. He let it fall back into the mug. He looked at Claire for a long moment, then said, barely above a whisper, "What else have we missed?" "Claire." In the quiet of morning, Brattleboro lay blanketed in snow, and for the first time in years, Thomas asked his daughter to tell him a story. Claire zipped her coat to the top and pulled on her gloves before stepping outside. The sun had not yet fully risen, but the sky was beginning to glow with the pale blush of dawn. Snow clung to the railings of the back porch and softened every sound. It was the kind of stillness that asked for care for silence. Thomas stood near the bird feeder, already scattering seeds onto the cleared patch below, wearing his old wool cap and a flannel jacket, buttoned unevenly. She joined him without speaking, and for a few minutes they simply watched. A pair of sparrows dart in and out of the feeder's arch like timid visitors. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost apologetic. "I didn't know about the letter," he said. "Or the trust. I didn't even know. How little I knew." Claire folded her arms across her chest, boots crunching in the snow as she shifted weight. "Nora didn't tell many people," she said, "but she gave me the key, and she told me once when I was 16 that some things don't need to be loud to last." Thomas gave a short breath, nearly a laugh. "That sounds like her." They walked along the fence line, past the lilac bushes, now skeletal with winter. Claire hesitated before she spoke again. "Vanessa didn't mean to shut me out at first," she said. "But over time, it just became easier for everyone to let her decide things." She was louder, more certain. "You were quiet," he said. "I was trying to be steady," she replied. "Grandma saw that. She wrote to me even when she was sick." He stopped. Then his boots planting firmly in the snow. "Vanessa told us you didn't want to come see her, that you were too busy." Claire turned toward him. "She called me, once told me it would upset Nora too much if I came, that the doctors said limited visitors were best." Thomas looked out over the backyard, his shoulders rising with a deep inhale. "I should have asked you directly." Claire didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Inside, the fire had already been lit. Eleanor sat in her chair with a ball of yarn in her lap, a half-knitted square, forming slowly between her fingers. Claire moved into the kitchen and began boiling water for tea. She made it just the way she remembered, Nora teaching her strong with a splash of milk and a swirl of honey that caught the light in the spoon. When she brought it to her mother, Eleanor blinked at the cup, then smiled softly. "You remembered?" she said. Claire settled beside her on the couch. The fire hissed quietly, and on the radio, a Glenn Miller tune drifted through the static, something about moonlight and dancing in springtime. It wrapped the room in something old and tender. They sat that way for several minutes before Claire rose and said, "I want to show you something." They climbed the attic stairs together, Eleanor holding the banister like she hadn't done so in years. The light up there was dimmer today, overcast and filtered through the round window. Claire led her to the cedar chest and opened it with the key still warm in her coat pocket. She lifted the ring first, then the letter. Unfolding it with reverence, Eleanor read in silence, lips parting slightly as she reached the signature. "Claire sees with her heart." She read aloud, "Not her ego." Claire knelt beside her, watching her mother's expression soften and shift. Eleanor reached forward and touched her daughter's hand. "I think we were so afraid of losing control, we forgot who held us together." They looked through the rest of the contents together. Old sketches Nora had made a pressed flower between the pages of a notebook. At the bottom of the box was a photograph slightly curled at the edges. Nora standing between Claire and June, their arms linked all three smiling into the sun. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 4 words. "My true trustees." Downstairs, the front door slammed shut against the wind. Claire and Eleanor exchanged a glance. A pair of car doors clacked open and closed. They moved to the window and peeked through the curtain, A black sedan was parked at the edge of the driveway, and Vanessa had just stepped out. She wasn't alone. Vanessa returned, expecting a war. She walked into a room where warmth had already begun to return without her permission. The Maple Oak Diner had barely changed in 20 years. It still smelled of frying butter and fresh coffee, and the windows fogged slightly from the heat inside, meeting the chill of early December air. A bell over the door jingled as Claire stepped in, brushing snowflakes from her coat. She spotted June first, already seated in a booth by the window, hands wrapped around a stoneware mug, steam rising into her silver hair. Vanessa arrived exactly on time. She wore a winter white coat and heeled boots, her expression unreadable, her breath visible in the cold air as she crossed the slush-lined street. Claire rose as her sister approached, offering a soft "Morning." Vanessa didn't respond with words, but gave a tight nod before sliding into the booth opposite June. Claire sat beside the older woman, whose presence was unannounced but firmly rooted. "You didn't say June would be here?" Vanessa said, after removing her gloves with crisp, deliberate movements. "I didn't think I needed to," Claire replied gently. A waitress with a short haircut and bright lipstick appeared beside them. "Good to see you girls," she said, pouring coffee into Claire's cup without asking. "Pancakes are extra fluffy today. Weather makes the batter rise better."
Just coffee, thanks,
Vanessa said. "Coming right up!" the woman replied, disappearing with practiced ease. Outside, the snow on the rooftops was beginning to melt, glistening under the sun that had finally broken through the clouds. Vanessa placed a folder on the table, pristine and clipped. "I had the documents revised. The language is neutral now, no assumption of ownership, no single executor." Claire reached into her bag and placed a thinner folder beside it.
This is my proposal. A family agreement.
"All decisions about the property must be unanimous. Full transparency. Any sale will only go through with signatures from all three of us." Vanessa stared at her. "Even though you could have blocked it entirely." Claire nodded. "I'm not blocking the sale, just insisting we all see the same truth." June pulled a third folder from her oversized purse, the edges worn. She slid it toward Vanessa, without a word. Vanessa opened it slowly. Inside was the notarized copy of Nora's trust addendum. Her eyes scanned the page mouth, pressing into a thin line. She said nothing. The waitress returned and refilled all the mugs. "Son's making the maple run early this year," she said, to no one in particular, before moving to the next booth. "I didn't think you'd share the power," Vanessa said quietly, still looking down. Claire offered a small smile. "I didn't think you'd come back." Vanessa looked up, her expression no longer guarded. She reached for the pen clipped to her folder and signed. She didn't look at anyone as she did it, but the motion was steady. She passed the documents to Claire and, almost as an afterthought, said under her breath, "Thanks." Claire met her gaze. "You're welcome." They left the diner separately. Claire walked June back to her car, the old woman moving slowly but with purpose.
Your grandmother would have been proud,
she said, as she climbed into the driver's seat. "Not because you won anything,
but because you remembered who you are."
Back at the house, Thomas was already in the front yard, fiddling with the sagging hook on the porch post. Eleanor stood nearby, holding the faded "Give Thanks" banner, the corners curled from wind and time. Claire took one end, her father held the other. They stretched it carefully between the porch posts, knots tying tighter this time level and even. Claire and Thomas rehang the faded "Give Thanks" banner. This time both ends evenly held. The snow had melted just enough to reveal the familiar edges of home, and in the quiet, afterward something softer settled in. Claire hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded anything, but by standing steady, she helped her family remember who they were. Sometimes kindness doesn't need to be loud, to be lasting, and the quietest acts, offering a hand, choosing not to judge, can echo through generations more than any declaration ever could. If this story stirred something in you, perhaps today is the day to let someone feel seen, like a worn banner rehung with care. Some things are worth holding on to, especially when they remind us who we really are.